Welcome, welcome, welcome. Health Issues. I'm your host, Chris Sylvain. I am totally honored. We're excited today. We have the District Attorney of the City of New Orleans, Mr. Leon Cannizzaro. We're excited. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Chris, for inviting me. I appreciate that.
No, we're truly honored and just really looking forward to it. We think it's a great thing. We're going to start off. First, tell us a little bit about your background. I think you said Mid-City, Broadmoor. If we can just get a little background.
I was born and I was raised in the Broadmoor area of the city of New Orleans, Broad in Washington.
All right.
I attended the St. Matthias School. There's no longer St. Matthias School. It's
Okay.
I forget the name of it, but it's not St. Matthias. It was on Broad Street.
Okay.
I went to De La Salle High School, went to UNO, then got my law degree from Loyola. Started as an assistant district attorney in 1978, stayed there for about 5 years, left and worked in the public defender's office for about 3 years, then was elected by the community as a judge of criminal district court, stayed there for about 17 years until 2002. I then ran for the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeal, was elected to that position, served there for about 5 years, and in 2008 the public elected me as a district attorney, and that's where I've been for the last almost 4 years. I'm married. I have four children. They're not so small anymore. The youngest one is in law school, and I'm very proud of my wife and my 4 children.
Youngest one in law school.
Youngest is in law school, yes.
All right, following behind father.
Yeah, well, then I have a daughter that's a lawyer also, so she works in the office with us, and she's done a very good job to help her father, as you would say. So she's done a good job for us.
Not bad, not bad. I think I saw in your bio, Daddy was a shoe salesman.
My father was a shoe salesman. I know that I'm dating myself when I say this. I know many people are not going to remember this, but it was the Imperial Shoe Store. It was located on the corner of Bourbon and Canal Street.
I remember.
And he worked there for almost 30 years.
Wow. Yeah, I know. I used to sell shoes some years ago, and that's why I connected.
Well, to be honest, I did a little bit of that myself in college. I made a few dollars selling shoes on spring break and on weekends, and it was a little different experience than what I'm doing now. But it was a lot of fun back then.
Back then, you could work your way through college.
I helped. I have to say, UNO was an easier cost. There were no TOPS programs back then, so we had to pay the tuition. But what I made selling shoes helped me. With law school, I needed a little bit of help. It was Loyola. It was a private school, so I needed a little bit of help from my parents, and thank God they were willing to assist. My parents always said, and I tell this to everyone, you know, I'm very proud of my mother and father. They did not have much education, and they recognized that if you were going to be successful, they saw that it was very important that you get an education, and I think they worked day in and day out to make sure that me and my sister received an education, to give us the best possible education we could get. And believe me, every day I am thankful for that.
Hey, that it really is fantastic, and that's kind of by happenstance, it really brings us kind of to where we're going, because we do know that education and incarceration rates are, divergent. One goes up, the other one's down, and Louisiana is the incarceration capital of the world.
Yes,
it is. It is it. In New Orleans, as Cindy Chang or whatever, I forgot her name, did this thing in the Times-Picayune. All the other jails depend upon New Orleans to send them business. And so that's kind of what happens. But let's, from a broad perspective, where are the incarceration rate in the world? Let's talk about, I see you're kind of in a bird's eye seat. Everything comes to you. Whatever's happening in the community comes to you. The judges, you have to deal with that. From the state legislator, the laws, looking at the laws, it comes to you. If you had all the power and money to kind of move these things around, tell us, what would you do?
Well, I first of all don't think, from what my perspective is, we work in criminal justice.
Right.
I don't think the criminal justice system needs to be changed. Okay. I honestly believe the criminal justice system that we have in this country, not just Orleans Parish, but in the United States, is probably the best system around as far as resolving conflicts.
You mean as far as for the jury system, the judge system, that structure itself?
The adversarial system.
Okay.
In other words, no one goes to jail. No one gets convicted without having his day in court. He has a right to due process.
Right.
He has a right to be made aware of the charge, and he has a right to defend that charge.
Okay.
I guess that there are things that we are seeing now where maybe we can do a bit of a better job with regard to our criminal justice system in this regard. A young man who comes into the system, let's say he's arrested for a minor offense, possession of narcotics. It's his first offense. There's a almost 99% chance that individual, if he does plead guilty or if he is convicted, is going to receive a suspended sentence and be placed on probation. Now, the question becomes, what do we do with him once we've got this young man in the system and he's been given this suspended sentence? What do we do with him? You know, I could add that as district attorney, what I try to do in many of those cases for the nonviolent first offenders and even some of the second offenders, we try to put them in our diversion program, a program which basically places them on probation under the supervision of our counselors in the DA's office for a period of anywhere from 9 months up to 2 years, to try to get them to not come back into the system, to try to do the things they are supposed to do. And when I say do the things they're supposed to do, I'll talk about that in just 1 second when we move on, let's say, to probation. But what we try to do is we try to keep them from having that criminal record. Because we know, statistics indicate that once that person gets that felony conviction, it makes it so much more difficult for them for educational and economic opportunities, job opportunities. It's more difficult for them to achieve some of those goals once they have that felony conviction. So if a person can successfully complete a program with us, we say we're not going to charge you. We're going to let the charge go. You can go into court and get the matter expunged because you've only been arrested. And we're very, very proud of that program. We have, when we took office, there were about 250 people in the program. No DA has ever done really more than about 250. We have it up to 800 people. We've done a very good job of increasing the numbers, and as I have said, if we could get the proper funding, I'd love to increase it to 2,000 because I think there are so many more people out there that we can help and we can keep them out of the criminal justice system. But let's talk about the person that maybe doesn't make it in diversion, and we have to put him in court. He comes in, again, as a first offender with a nonviolent charge. The judge, as I said, in all likelihood is going to give that person probation, give him a suspended sentence. The most important thing from the judge's perspective, in my opinion, is the most important thing the judge does is sentence individuals, because that's where the judge has an opportunity to turn someone's life around. Look, let's be honest. People that come into the criminal justice system come there because of one of several factors. They don't have an education, they don't have any job skills, and they, in all likelihood, don't have a job. And what we're seeing more and more is that they have a substance abuse problem. Those three factors are, in my opinion, what a judge and what the criminal justice system has to address when an individual comes into court and enters a plea of guilty. Now, how do you deal with that? I think one of the things I did, I thought that was very successful in criminal court when I was a judge, was the drug court program. The judge, to a large extent, has to buy in to that person's probation. The judge has to almost be willing to be a probation officer, to work with that individual, to make that young man or woman come back on a frequent occasion and visit with the judge. Let me see what you're doing. Are you going to school? Are you working? Are you taking drug tests? Are you doing things that we think will keep you from going back and using drugs again? And if the person is able to successfully complete those things, if a person gets an education, and I'm not talking about a high school diploma even or a college degree, I'm simply saying get the GED. We find that the majority of the men and women who come into the system, even with the GED, never come back into the criminal justice system again. If we can give them some job skill, train them to do some work, and keep them gainfully employed, we see the majority of those men and women never come back into the system again. And most importantly, if we can get a person to stop using drugs, if we can keep them away from drugs, then that person is more likely than not to be back into our criminal justice system. So that to me is what is important when a person gets probation. It's also important to keep in mind that if we don't do those things, if the judge doesn't take that responsibility seriously, then you can't expect the defendant, the person who comes into the system, to take it seriously. He or she is going to think, well, there's no enforcement here. Probation's not a bad thing, but probation has got to be meaningful. And if it's not meaningful, and the offender is just allowed to go out and, for instance, not follow the conditions of probation that the judge set forth with regard to going to school, working, or staying drug-free, then there's a very good chance that individual comes back into our system again. He comes back as a second offender. And sometimes he'll come back not as a second offender, maybe using drugs, but now he may escalate to some more serious problem. Because we know that a person who is using drugs and who is addicted to narcotics is in all likelihood not going to be able to hold down a job. So he's going to have to get the funds for the drugs in some way. And you know what we have found is that a person will, for instance, steal from his family. He'll take from his family. And then the family gets wise to him, and they're going to sort of keep him away. They're not going to want him to be around. And then he's going to start stealing from strangers, and strangers are going to look at him a lot less kindly than a family member will. So that's how you see people sort of escalate through the criminal justice system. And you know, so it's important that a person be given an opportunity, that a first offender be given a chance, but it's also important that that chance be meaningful, that there be some sort of opportunity to make sure that the individual does not come back into the system. And let's even move to the next step, even within the Department of Corrections, the correctional facilities. Let's say an individual is not able to successfully complete a probation program for whatever reason. He or she does not go to school, not maintaining employment, and the judge feels that you've not satisfied the conditions of your probation, so the probation is going to be revoked. The person is put in the custodial environment. It seems to me that when a person is in that environment, we shouldn't just sort of warehouse him, as we have done for far too long. Don't just let him sit there for a year or 2 years or whatever the sentence might be. But let's do something to improve that person so he or she never comes back into the system. Because as we talked about before, what we find is if you allow a person to just sit in the system, especially if he's in the custodial environment, then what he's going to learn is how to be a better criminal when he gets out. He's going to have to learn how to be tough in jail in order to survive.
You know that.
And again, we know he's not going to come in with an education, a job skill, and a drug problem. He's going to leave without an education, a job skill, and a drug problem. But now he's learned how to be tough. So he becomes a little more brazen on the street. He becomes a little more difficult to deal with on the street. And that's how we find many of the young men and women sort of escalating into more serious criminal conduct until they are charged with an offense that is so serious, a murder, an armed robbery, or he is a repeat offender where he is not eligible to be given an opportunity that a first offender or a nonviolent offender might receive.
Okay. Awesome. But structurally, though, like the diversion program, I think it's awesome. You didn't mention, but you have to have a master's degree to be a counselor in your diversion program.
Those are one of the
master's
conditions.
Social worker, a counselor. So these are serious, educated individuals that's really spending time. That's why the recidivism rate is so little, I would think that.
Well, I mean, we have, as I said, with the people that we have put in the program, they will meet with their counselor. And you're correct. Everyone who works in the program does have a master's degree in counseling or social work or some area that would be helpful or beneficial to them. And they are going to meet with the person that's placed on the program on a very frequent basis. They're going to talk to them, and we're going to try to provide to them as many of the services as we can in-house. It may be necessary for them, for instance, to go elsewhere to get, for instance, a GED. We have counselors who are qualified to work with the substance abuse programs and can administer sort of the substance abuse counseling. We have people that are in a position to do that. We do have to try to send them out to get sometimes the job skills, and we'll also pick up the phone and call prospective employers about giving some of these men and women jobs, because we know that if they're in our diversion program, we want them to be employed. We want them to sort of have things to do that are constructive. We try to ensure employers, we're going to guarantee you, we're going to give you somebody who's drug-free. because if they're not drug-free, then they're going to be in court, and we're not going to have them in our program. So the program is designed to give that nonviolent first offender an opportunity to see that, look, I've made a mistake. I'd like to think that we work from the adage that just because someone has made a mistake during the course of his life, that doesn't mean that his whole life is a mistake. We feel that people can improve, they can get better, but they need some help. They just need some guidance that maybe they haven't had, and if they're given an opportunity, we find that many people respond to it in an affirmative fashion.
See, the reason I'm smiling, because, see, you're a DA. That sounds like a hospital. You see what I'm saying? All right. No, I mean, structurally.
Now, you know, we can be tough when we got to with some of the guys, too.
No, I don't mean that. I'm saying that the problem is, you know, like we were talking about before, if we've spilled some milk, if nobody else is going to pick up the milk, okay, you're going to pick up the milk. I mean, we need master's level social workers, counselors, or whatever. I mean, that's the problem in the school system. That's the problem in the criminal justice system, anything else like that. Why put money into the police department when you could put money into this type of program? The only thing I'm saying, though, is that to me, it'd be better if a university did it, or if a hospital did it, because then they'll have the whole wraparound services. But it needs to be done. But of lack of anybody else doing it, no, we're glad you're doing it, and you see that it's keeping people from going into the system. So it's a worthwhile thing. But the question goes back is, all right, let's look at it this way. Some neighborhoods, we talked about it, Peter Sharp mentioned, you got 70% of the young men, particularly African-American young men, incarcerated. All right. If they had the diversion program, believe me, so we've altered all of those figures. But since it's not available, we don't have that in the system, young guys are going to jail for drugs, where drugs, whether they're using cocaine, as Dr. Dunn would say, whether it be cocaine or alcohol or whatever, it's the same damage to that individual. But it just so happens that these individuals are spending all of their lives in jail. So to the individual, wait, this thing is corrupt. They see you as, hey, no, the system is totally corrupt. It's not working. But what we're finding out is that if you would fund the diversion programs, if we would fund these other things, the actual jury, judge, prosecutor thing is working if these other services are taken care of. Would you agree?
Oh, there's no question about that. I mean, I think that you have to understand the criminal justice system should not be about just incarcerating individuals.
Thank you.
Criminal justice system should be about rehabilitating people. But I know what do we mean by rehabilitation? From my perspective, it means if a young man is arrested and he never comes back into this system again because he's doing the right thing, then we've done our job. That, to me, is what we mean by rehabilitation. We don't mean that this young man never comes back into the system because we put him in jail for the rest of his life. The system has failed that individual. I mean, that's unfortunate, but it has. That individual has done something so wrong to society that society believes he should never be allowed to be back out on the streets again. So that's, to me, is a failure. That's not a success. You know, one of the big things I saw, and one of the reasons I was so interested and anxious to do the drug court as a judge, one of the things I'm so excited about with the diversion program is many of the young men and women who stood in front of me were extremely intelligent people. They were not as though they were, people aren't born bad. Circumstances, in my opinion, dictate what caused people to go down one road or the other. I think everyone would agree with that. And the potential that I saw in many of the people was great if just guided or channeled in the proper direction. And the most important thing is the education. So many of the young men and women who came in court, and so many of the young men and women who find themselves in the criminal justice system just don't even have the least bit of an education. Dropping out of school in 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th. You even think after 10th they get that degree. We saw many kids drop out in 11th grade, 12th grade. We'd see kids drop out of school in February of their 12th grade year, and they have 2 more months, 3 more months before they get a diploma, and you couldn't understand why they would do it. But it was just I didn't see it was for me. I didn't see I was going anywhere. I didn't see the value of it.
Right.
And it was just about sort of trying to redirect, rechannel that thinking that there is value. Your life is worth something. You can accomplish something in your life.
Right.
It's not like you have to consider yourself defeated. Don't quit. Don't give up.
Okay.
And the basic tool
right.
that, in my opinion, we've tried to give to every individual was at least a GED. You know, I'm convinced, and statistics have borne this out, we get at least a GED to the kids who come in the system who don't have the high school diploma. If they just get the GED,
right.
like 80% of them never come back into the system again. And if you can do that and get them a job and get them to see the dangers of drugs and get them off of that,
right.
and that's the big problem, as we talked about.
The drug
getting
issue.
the kids off the drugs. We can do those things, then there's a good chance we really solve the solve the crime problem, excuse me.
Right.
We solve the drug problem,
right.
then we solve our crime problem in the city of New Orleans.
Now, philosophical question, you know what I mean? Because you have to deal with the hands that are dealt with you, that we talked about before. All right, talk to Representative Joe LaPinto. His thing was, and the conversation always sticks, the reason African-American males are flooding the jails is because with drug crimes is because the police only respond to calls. And so they get more calls in a black neighborhood, and they find more drugs, and so you have more drug arrests. And so they end up in the system, flunk diversion and go back, and they end up in the prisons because we have a thing of, because there's just more calls. Now we know statistically African-American males are using the same amount of drugs, even less than Asians, Caucasian, everybody else, all right? But as far as we're filling up the jails because you have police respond to 911, they go there, see the marijuana, see the crack pipe, find themselves in court. Is that justice?
Chris, that's where I think, that's where the system, that's where we need to help, so to speak. That's where, in other words, that's someone who's crying out for help. That's the individual that needs the most help, and that's what I think to some extent we're neglecting. Don't just arrest the person and put the person in jail and forget about them. That's what I said before about warehousing an individual.
Right.
You have an opportunity to step into someone's life and to make a meaningful change. Let's say it is unfortunate that the person can't get diversion. Let's say he doesn't successfully complete the program.
Right.
Let's say the judge gives him probation and he fails out of the probation, and the judge puts the person in jail.
Right.
Then when you have that person, when you have that sort of, that individual,
right.
it seems to me it's our responsibility as a community to do something while that person is incarcerated
right.
to prevent him from coming back into the system again, especially if he's going in there on a nonviolent offense. An offense where this is a person who, when he's off of the drugs, right. he's a very good person, he's going to be attentive, he's going to listen, get him the things he needs right. in order to not come back into the system. Right. It's sort of like we should be addressing this problem by treating the illness. You know, if we had an epidemic in one part of town, then sure, we're going to send all the medical people into that part of town to resolve that epidemic,
right.
to cure those people, to heal
right.
those individuals.
Right.
The same thing can be said about the person who is getting arrested. If that person is getting arrested, he's got to be getting arrested for some reason. And again, it's the same old, and I say this over and over again because I have never seen any evidence to the contrary. It's about an education, it's about a drug problem, it's about a job skill.
Okay.
If they are doing those things, and again, if they're in that custodial environment, let's get it for them. Let's get them the things they need. And to some extent, now that I'm going to agree with you, to that extent the criminal justice system has failed the community because it has not been able to respond to those needs. And until we're able to do that, we're going to continue to see this cycle of the arrest and incarceration and arrest and incarceration. But it's not something that cannot be solved. It's something, another, you have people that are brought into you, right. you have people that you can work with, and again, you know, really you do see some problems. I don't want to say you don't see any problems, but you do see people are not causing that many problems in jail. The people, when they're there, given an opportunity, they are going to try to improve themselves. Okay. But unfortunately, for sheriffs and people in the Department of Corrections, if the budgets aren't there to give them the necessary treatment, the education, then it's not going to be addressed. And again, it's simply warehousing someone, and when you warehouse them in the custodial environment, there is a good chance he comes out tougher than when he went in.
I think you see it over and over again. Now let's look at this. From my opinion, I've been spending a lot of time, not a lot, but enough time at Tulane and Broad, particularly in the past 6 months, sitting there. I see an assistant district attorney prepared, ready. They're firing off like a rocket. I mean, they're blowing the place up, all right? Young kid, about 30 years, 25 years old or something like that, and, you know, they're sitting there with an assistant with them. They have an assistant and 2 assistants with them, and they got all their paperwork. And I see them firing off at the judge, and the judge is working hard to not get beat up by the assistant DA, okay? So the judge is sitting there, and he or she, they're going at it. And I see a public defender over here as if he's not even there. Not saying anything again. I know great public defenders, and you worked in the public defender office. But to me, this thing is unbalanced. I don't see it balanced at all, because the defendant is just kind of hanging in there trying to figure out, will y'all help me?
Well, I appreciate that you say my guys are firing off and they're prepared. I appreciate that, and that sounds, I'm happy to hear that. I try to go to court every day.
Yeah,
well, from my perspective,
All right.
I try to go to court every day. I do try to, I try to go to as many of the sections as I can. I try to see what's going on. I believe that I am very much hands-on, especially with some of the young assistants, because you're right. Many of them are still in their 20s and early 30s, and they still have a lot of learning to do, and you don't learn about the criminal justice system overnight.
All right.
Certainly, I believe, and I believe that as a judge, I wanted to make sure that the person who stood in that courtroom who was accused of a crime had adequate representation. I always tried to make sure that there was an effective public defender who was there to represent that individual. We tried a lot of cases in my court, and I like to think that we tried a lot of cases because the public defender felt like he wasn't going to get punished for going to trial, that he felt that he could his client, if his client professed his innocence, he had an opportunity to let the jury decide the case, let the jury hear what the facts were, and they can make the decision. My position now is I advocate. I advocate for this community. It is our job when some defendant tells us, and the defendant makes the call whether he wants to go to trial or he wants to plead guilty. It is my job to now convict those individuals that we believe have violated the laws of this state. I certainly agree that the public defenders should be adequately financed. I think that's important.
Yeah.
I think that the person who is accused of a crime and is an indigent and cannot afford counsel has a right to adequate representation.
They're cutting this off, but I'm with. They need money. They need money. Y'all need more money. Diversion. They need money, but we got to stop these young men going to jail. And hey, let's keep pushing. We need to have conferences, whatever it takes. The system has to be changed. The criminal justice system may not be working, but these people are going to jail. Black men, stop it, change it, fight as hard as you can. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.